So this is the fourth in the series of DataZoom's Leadership, Wisdom and Insight series. Joining me today, as you saw on the screen, is Sudip. Sudip is the Head of Data and Analytics and Connectivity at London Borough of Camden. So we've talked about a few things, but let's just go back to, sorry about this, Sudip.
No problem.
Tell me a little bit about what you're doing at Camden. And your day-to-day role, and just give an overview of what's happening.
Okay. So we started by saying the job title is a bit of mouthful. So I was trying to describe really what it means in the context of the organization, really. So my role covers data and analytics. So that is us kind of thinking about how we become more data-driven, how we make Camden the place when people think of data in the London context, how do we attract the right kind of businesses to Camden to generate economic growth. Connectivity, very similar kind of links there. So connectivity means things like promoting our Wi-Fi provision in the borough, tackling some of the digital inclusive issues that we really have a diverse group of people that we look after. So that makes it really real in terms of what we could be doing in that space. So that that includes working with a lot of partners, whether they're telecoms providers or companies, or for example, more recently, we've been thinking about digital connectivity in the context of universal credit, for example.
Right, okay.
And how we make a bigger difference by linking things together. And from an economic growth perspective, again, most businesses who want to move into areas are after a really good connectivity, as much as the location aspects and anything else, they depending on what type of business they are. So, we work quite closely with our business improvement district around connectivity as well. And really, we want to make Camden the place where, we were talking about the context of Brexit there as well. We need to generate more of these foundational opportunities if we are to be a smart city.
Sure.
There's a lot of talk about London becoming the smartest city in the world. So, connectivity and some of the data aspirations go hand in hand. I've also been a business partner, so that's sitting across kind of some of our service areas and helping them think about their priorities, etc. I've also had the pleasure, really, as part of having some of these internal and external contexts to help us think about our organizational strategy.
Right, okay.
So we've been doing some conscious thinking around having a digital strategy that enables us to think about these things consciously. But actually, our current thinking is to try and align that with our organizational vision. So we're doing some thinking around what Camden as a place will be like in 2025, and as part of it, obviously 2025 is 7 years away, so we need to keep an eye out. But as much as that, we also have some real pressures still.
Sure.
So over the last 6 years, we've had really, like most of the public sector, we've had pressures around 163 million wiped out of our bottom line. Over the next 3 years, we think that will be somewhere like 40 million. So, the pressures on public sector squeeze aren't over by any means. But I think we need to constantly evolve ourselves. And, when you came here and when we were talking about this office building, for example, we kind of revived our thinking about removing paper trails, for example. When we moved here 3 years ago. So, this was all part of our strategic thinking. So we're doing that constantly in terms of where we go next.
So it sounds like the innovation is happening in Camden. I mean, we're in a district in Camden, in the centre of London, which is next to Google, next to many hubs of startups just around the corner by the river. But I want to come back to a point you made earlier, which is about becoming data-driven. Now, a lot of people, that we work with are on this constant journey to become data-driven. I don't particularly, it's one of those terms that I think, okay, I understand what people say about data-driven, but we're all data-driven in some ways, regardless of actually having data. So tell me, what's the vision for Camden to become? How do you, this is not a typical, this is not a typical private sector. You haven't got huge amounts of cash. Not to say that every, private company has, but so there's a lot of efficiencies that you've got to create here. How are you moving from? Okay, you've moved into new offices, you've said, which you've got rid of paper, which is quite amazing. But how are you moving? What's the next generation? What initiatives are you doing to create that data-driven culture at Camden?
So, I mean, it's quite interesting you mentioned the obviously the obvious aspect of differences between the private and the public sector. So, in that context, to maybe paint a picture a little bit, a typical local government organisation will provide around 600 lines of business. Okay, wow. So, I mean, to put any data work into perspective there, the work we do is quite diverse. We have a lot of legacy issues, considering the sector we're in. Of course, yeah. So when we say becoming data-driven, I think the journey is probably an understatement. Okay. So, our journey in Camden started about 5 years ago when we as an organization stopped kind of chopping and changing our budgets and said we want to be more outcomes driven. Okay. And from a data perspective, it's a really important aspect when you have such diverse range of services. So we started, for example, investing in business intelligence program, which is looking at going hand in hand with our work stream around knowing and understanding our business. Mm-hmm. How can we, in a world where there's so much data, and I'm just talking about local government, in the public sector context, there's so much data there. So becoming data-driven is in both sense about trying to come up with insights based on what we already know, mm-hmm. What is the evidence, whether it's contextual or whether it's just pure stats. What is what we know telling us, and how can it help us inform our outcomes rather than necessarily predict the future? Because I think that when we started looking at this, the hype in the market would say predict the future, and we used to say actually we need to start with the foundation. Yes. We need to remove some of the quality barriers that exist. Mm-hmm. To then predict the future, otherwise we'll predict the wrong future. Yeah.
So let's go back to that. You talked about legacy, and you talked about the complexities of 600 lines of business, which, if I was to look at a private sector business, there is nothing like that in the private sector unless you're an insurance company that has bought organically other companies and haven't merged them together. But that's a big, tough landscape in terms of 600 lines of business. Now, data must be all over the place, So you coming in, what were the first things that you did to try and get your head around what was available? You must have had a lot of competing priorities from different lines of business. So how did you structure that? What were the first steps that you took? Because a lot of people ask that, certainly in our Q&As. So I'm just interested to hear from that point.
Yeah, and a lot of people in our sector also ask around, how do you do a business case for something like this? Mm. In our world, in your words, we don't have unlimited amount of resources. Sure. But so I think the two are quite linked. So, the way we did this was we tried to align our thinking around data with the thinking around the financial outcomes in the organization originally, and the outcomes for the organization in the sense of there were services where, for example, we were thinking of stopping some services or increasing some other services. Right. So in order to understand the impact or actually even come to a conclusion of which services you stop, which services you increase, give you a real example. So our planning service which is traditionally quite paper heavy. Planning processes in government are driven by legislation. The legislation says you have to keep the plans, the plans secret forever.
Okay.
So, from the perspective of getting digital, it's a really interesting area, and there's lots more thinking going on in that space. But one of the real practical things we did using kind of data was actually understand what correspondence do we send out.
Okay.
What parts are statutory and non-statutory. And we made some conscious political decisions, which meant that we no longer send certain elements. And, it sounds like quite a basic thing to do, but by doing this, we were able to save around 200K annually from our budget, which is, and that's a very real example of something we did. We have around 65 dashboards that do similar things.
I was going to ask you
across the organization, which cover, most of those 600 services we provide. And the way we kind of came up with those numbers is we said originally we want organization-wide coverage.
Right.
So, the appetite from this organization was to do this big. We had a very kind of co-design-led approach to it. Okay. So we worked quite closely with services. Rather than this is something that happens somewhere in a locked room. Sure. That they then get given access to, and they say, oh, this doesn't work for me. This is something we work together on. We all bought into the process. And some of the findings are really interesting. So, for example, we're currently doing some thinking around what is the needs picture of residence population. And we've been able to do this because of the range of access we have in terms of data. So, when I say becoming data-driven, this example probably makes that real again. So we are trying to understand, we have 240,000 residents in Camden. Right. If we were to map them in a triangle of needs, what would that triangle look like? Who are the people that require the most amount of help from us? Right. And what do we need to do as an organization? And this covers like a whole lot of cultural things, like breaking down silos, because when we talk about outcomes, we're not talking about adult services versus children's services versus housing services. We're talking about people and families and households. Their needs are quite complex. Yes. So to try and understand that picture, paint it alongside the outcomes work is what makes us more and more data-driven. So, we can really start to make a bigger difference. Yeah.
It's an interesting point. You talk about because it sounds like it's a very, that triangle of needs. To me, when I think about, running a customer segmentation profile or doing a single customer view, that's a pretty complex view that you've got to get of 250,000 residents with specific needs for an individual. So I'm thinking this is down to an individual basis. And then that individual also has a family, and that family has, the context of what they're in and how they. I mean, that makes it even more complex in terms of the messaging, the services that you need to provide. How complex do you have to? That's complex on the outside. Okay, and you talked about external, but internally, those 65 dashboards. How do they move the service-based culture in Camden? How do they move it more to the focused individual? How does that happen?
So I know what you're saying, but to give you maybe the example in a different way, in most local government organizations, we've been doing this thinking. I think my point is we need to do it in a data-driven way. And I think, if you think about having like a typical council having 10 outcomes, so we want to increase more jobs, we want to house more people, I'm making it more basic. Problems are. And we need to help complex families with issues that are diverse, right? And so what we're doing is, looking at insights from, for example, our master data solution, which brings that household picture. So we're combining that household view that we have alongside these 65 dashboards, which give us the reach across different services in the organization. and then creating a needs picture, which then we are making some conscious choices around how do you, for example, how do you balance out someone with issues around, I don't know, domestic violence, quite sensitive obviously, versus having rent arrears. Well, guess what? Our findings indicate that those two could be quite linked.
Right.
So we always use internally an example where, our most social landlords, so in Camden we look after 30,000 leaseholders and tenants, 750 sites, so these are estates. So quite broad picture across
diverse,
Camden. And what we found is, for example, we'll be catering for a repair service for those customers, and we'll be sending out repairs operatives when a door gets knocked out.
Right.
And someone is called to repair.
Yeah.
Now, if that happens once, you send out, you do your reactive repair service, then perfect.
I know where you're going.
If that happens 5 times, we need to think carefully about what's happening underneath.
Correct.
There could be domestic abuse
Yes.
issues and stuff. So, we haven't quite cracked the whole problem.
It's fascinating that.
But we're on our way to have that kind of thinking to designing our outcomes and saying, actually, if we paint the needs picture, at least we understand that, actually this person is known to our adult social care service and they have some real issues going on.
So let's just go back to the silos you were talking about earlier. And, traditionally in the UK, we've seen a lot of councils, and I don't want to go into history in terms of what's happened, but a lot of councils have not been joined up in that sense. So people have been able to go across different counties, different boroughs, crossing the lines and, do harm or, commit crime or whatever it might be. Tell me a little bit about how you're linking up Camden, Islington and Haringey. I'm interested in that and how you're using data across those. That's a huge part of London in itself. That covers a massive amount of territory.
Yeah, so 700,000 residents across the three organizations. So, putting that into perspective, size of some of the cities up north, if you like, sector. In terms of what we are doing, so we're currently doing some thinking around what we mean by sharing services.
Okay.
We're not alone in doing this.
Sure.
A lot of us in the public sector are thinking about this. In terms of what we're doing, particularly around data, I think will be quite interesting over time because, I described the needs picture we've been trying to do in Camden. Islington have been on a similar journey with their data program. And they have, and all three of us have very similar aspirations. So what we've agreed to do is, where it makes sense to do things once rather than 3 times over, I think it's a no-brainer. So, for example, there's a program of work where health and social care are linking up across North London. Yeah. That all three of us, and Barnet and Untitled, actually, as part of North London Consortium, are part of. So we're doing some data work together as part of those things. We also participated in the London Office of Analytics, which I know the Mayor's Office is going to revive and make it more operational. So again, there will be initiatives where cross-boundary data perspective makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, of course it does.
You mentioned crime. There's other issues, like, for example, we find rogue landlords, for example, move from one borough to another across London. So how can we join up? And tackle it. There's also counter fraud hub initiatives going on in London, which we all three are part of.
Fascinating.
So there's a lot of joint work aspirations going on. In terms of how we make it happen, will evolve over time, and what level of sharing happens. I think we'll see some changes.
So let's move to a different area right now. I love what you're doing in terms of the outcomes-based approach. Implementing, which is not a small feat, 65 dashboards to a culture which is very, being very, let's face it, public sector it can be quite difficult in terms of pushing people to a different, type of culture. Let's talk about the organisation strategy. You talked about that initially. I'm really interested because, with the organisation strategy and being data-driven, how are you linking those two up?
That's a really good question. So, I think you could argue we've done really well. I think we always talk to ourselves about how we've laid down the foundations by doing it.
Yeah.
There's learnings along the way. There's areas where we would have liked to do more, areas where we would have liked to do less. I think the reason why we've come as far as we have even is multitude of things. And you mentioned organizational strategy. I think it's a combination of leadership, progressive vision from the organization, as well as the political ambitions all aligning together, which you need in an organization like ours. So, for example, when we talked about becoming data-driven, we had buy-in from across kind of our management teams to our leaders to our portfolio holders who are our councillors, all thinking along the same lines, which is quite helpful to get anything going, in these organizations. I think in addition to that, we had a couple of other things happening which were around, for example, our chief exec is a big advocate of systems thinking principles. So when we were rethinking these outcomes, we were thinking them in those approaches. And I think by default, some of those approaches align themselves quite well to becoming data-driven, having the right kind of outcomes that you measure. So, a lot of things work hand in hand, which is where we've been able to provide that focus to say, actually, we're doing these dashboards. So, we want to understand council tax and business rates together. How can we do that in a very kind of visual way and have the outcomes that we work towards?
So you've put three buckets: organization, data, and then obviously digital. A lot of companies, and a lot of companies that we work with, and it's over the years have, in my opinion, are doing those three things separately. I'm very much, into the process of having one overall strategy. How are you aligning those things internally? What are you doing to ensure that we don't have 3 or 4 or 500 different types of documents racing around and no one can join up the dots? What are you doing in your role to achieve that?
So we started our thinking back in 2014. We were one of the first local government organizations to have a digital strategy document, which we published, because I think that it was quite an important point in time for us to actually say we're not thinking along the lines of running IT efficiently. We want to become digital as a bank. And that was more of a commitment type document, which had a whole lot of things we were doing, which we're continuing to do. That was aligned alongside our organization plan, which ran from 2012 to 17 at the time. And I think that's quite interesting in terms of how you describe the bucket. So, if you have that kind of an approach, you are in danger of having buckets. Because then what's stopping us from then having a separate document that talks about becoming data-driven?
Correct.
So what we're doing now as part of our current thinking is actually we're trying to align everything to one organizational vision. So our organizational vision, which I'd urge everyone to have a look at Camden 2025 and the approach we've taken there, which talks about being digitally driven, being data-driven, becoming innovative, and actually makes it real in the sense of what does that mean. So we talk about solving problems innovatively, but we've also talked about what we've done already in that. For example, we had a startup called Zing set up as part of our town hall in Camden, which was working with communities to solve some really interesting safety issues with women, etc. And we'll see a lot more of this. We'll see a lot more incubation type approach to services. Our leadership is very keen on that. But I think we are clear that we're not going to have buckets. We're going to have an organization vision, which talks about being digitally and data-driven and becoming innovative. And what does that mean for Camden as a whole?
So let's talk about you. What drives you? What drives success for you?
So I've always been in kind of values-driven. So I have a set of values I believe in and try and live by, whether it's life or work. And success to me is really quite an interesting subject. We could get quite philosophical about it, but I think we'll keep it data for now. I think success is really trying to make this happen, which is quite ambitious. So, one of the things that really drives me is how we can make a bigger difference. In my capacity, how can I create an environment where we become data-driven and do a whole lot of things? And we're privileged to have that buy-in in this organization. Personally, I think compassion is really important as well. So in terms of how you approach something is always really interesting. We believe in co-design. We believe in working with communities. So you will see, again, if you look Camden 2025, we have set up a citizens assembly. We're working with 300 community organizations. So, with the values of organization, as well as my own, I think,
have aligned.
So
it's that real purpose behind, that success factor for you and giving back and the compassionate. Because I think you're in a unique position in that sense. The data is not being classified to drive revenue to sell products. You're actually trying to work out how people are living and how people are, going to succeed in their lives day to day.
Yeah, I mean, we do have revenue generating efforts.
Sure, no, you do. Yes.
But you're right. I think our ambition is to make Camden work. Whatever that looks like.
So, how do you develop yourself as a leader then? How do you, you've gone from being a developer to where you are now. How are you developing yourself further or day to day? What do you do?
So I think like most others, like most of us, I like to read what's out there. So, there's loads of interesting things written about data. If we just look it up, we'll get blown away, right? So that's I think that is just there. But I think to me, it's conversations like this. We met at an event where really, I'm sure you noticed that myself and maybe one other from the public sector.
Yes.
So actually, there is something right there, right?
Yeah.
So in terms of developing ourselves, our thinking, the big organizations doing this, how can we learn from them in terms of, they might have revenue generating principles, but actually doing things at pace, where we can, there's a lot of things we can learn. We talk to people, we go next door and talk to our colleagues in Google and DeepMind around what they're doing.
Which you're so lucky to have them on your
doorstep.
doorstep.
To have them next door. We would probably talk to them anyway, but it helps. They're next door. I think it's a combination of things really, and I think we live in a world where it will get really interesting where we end up. So I was at the public sector show not long ago. We were talking about digital transformation,
right,
and trying to think of the future.
Yeah,
and I think the future, could be really interesting. So we're talking about data-driven, needs picture, etc. But small example, if driverless cars materialize, all of us, Transport for London, local organizations, we're all thinking about cycling and parking. If driverless cars materialize, the place changes, the game changes.
The whole landscape changes.
So, we need to think about ecosystem and how far we go philosophical versus actually keeping something real.
Practical, real.
We need to make sure we do things now where we have some real pressure, but actually keeping an eye out at the same time.
So throughout your career, and I had a look at your profile, as one does on LinkedIn, you've had you've come from the private sector, you've moved into the public sector, but along the way, I always like to understand, you've grown from a developer into a quite an amazing leadership position that you're in at the council.
Oh, thanks.
Along the way, who have been the people who have inspired you, the men and the women that have touched your capability and drive you forward in terms of leadership?
Wow, I think probably too many to name. But I think, generally speaking, I've been really privileged to work in a really progressive thinking organization where, most of the men and women here, the leaders, have a similar level of thinking. You
Right.
know? And the reason when I moved to the public sector, as you may have noticed in the profile, I've never worked before in government.
Yes, you hadn't.
Forget like, you know, local government.
Yeah.
So to try and understand even how an organization operates was new to me. So,
Yes.
you know, the thing that probably kept me here for as long as it has is the people, is the culture, is the values, and really most of the people I've worked in, and there's many leaders that I'm currently working with and have worked with in the past, who inspire me to develop myself. You know, there's a real culture here about helping people, which again, one of my value sets is helping people.
Yes.
Yeah. If we say technology isn't about people, we're missing a trick there.
Absolutely.
Whether it's data, technology, end of the day, people is what makes everything work.
Yeah. So I can see you're hugely passionate about data, the way it's going to help people, the way it's going to move the council to become more focused on their citizens. And for me, it from a data perspective, and from the way that you talk about technology and how it's shaping. You know, we hear a lot about artificial intelligence. We hear a lot about, you know, the new wave. And there's things you talked about around just the public records that you need to keep forever. Things like blockchain come to mind when you talk about that. What are the kinds of things that you're thinking about now for the future? You know, I'm not going to talk, you know, I know that AI is a specific thing and possibly, you know, we're not doing true AI right now, but we're doing machine learning. But, you know, how is the council thinking about, you talk about paperless society, I mean, in terms of the council. Where are you going? Where are you pushing those envelopes?
So one thing we're looking at the moment is this concept of the art of the possible.
Right.
And when we talk about blockchain, I mean, just as a technology that and to understand the art of the possible is interesting enough. So what we're doing is trying to understand it in the context of our sector.
Yeah.
So we're talking to people who've tried it. We're looking at case studies like Estonia, for example, where they've got you know, etc., and see actually what we can learn from them and how we will evolve into that space. That's stuff that might happen in the future.
Sure.
When we talk about AI, I think it gets quite interesting, right?
Yeah.
And we've had some laughs about this in the past. I think AI is probably the most misinterpreted buzzword that exists in our sector.
Yeah.
I think, you know, AI could mean different things to different people. I think at the end of the day, and that's why I'm suggesting the concept of data for good, if you like, because I think that is really important in the context of AI, where, you know, the robots are coming, if you believe certain certain press releases and stuff, and you know, they probably are coming, but I think as long as we have the right ethics, we have the right data management principles, and we have the ethos to do things for the betterment of our communities, I think that's the key. Whether you then feed chatbots processes forever, you know, which is what tends to be what most people are doing at the moment.
That's correct.
And you know, don't get me wrong, we're looking at chatbots as well. But what we are being really clear about is we don't want to reinvent the basics. So if there is a planning solution that someone has built, they keep up with legislation. That's as bread and butter, as I would call it, stuff. We don't want to reinvent it using AI. You know, we'd be crazy to reinvent some of that. So, you know, you would reinvent what would get automated, and hence everyone's automating stuff. But the danger is we'll just keep feeding it stuff forever. Where's the true AI? So I think it's more about actually finding those avenues to make a bigger difference. So, you know, I talked about the needs picture and predicting the future. I think to me that would be much better use of an AI technology to then make a bigger impact.
I agree with you, looking at the context of where you are, in particular the sensitivities around, and I think, you know, you talk about ethics, you talk about transparency, you talk about decision making, and I think, you know, you can't depend on a black box to make a decision, because you're in a very precarious situation with citizens who might be vulnerable, or who might be committing fraud. but you might be making the wrong decision based on particular bias. And I think we could talk, forever about those kind of things. So what I'm going to do is, I think my final question is, where next for you, Sudip? How's Sudip going to evolve as a leader?
Wow. So I think, we're constantly learning, all of us. So I'd like to continue to evolve, like we do as people. In terms of leadership, I'd love to be a CDO one day soon, hopefully. There aren't many CDOs in our sector at the moment, so I think it'll be interesting to see if that happens, how quickly it happens.
I know the cabinet office just...
so central government, we're seeing much more movement. So I think local perspective will be interesting over time. I have spent, as you say, most of my career in between digital transformation and data, but personally, I'd love to be a CDO.
Great. Well, look, what I'm going to do now, and thank you so much for your time, I'm going to open it up to the floor. What I'm going to ask everybody to do, I know there's been some questions coming in. So if you haven't asked a question yet for Sudip, please do. You can put it on the chat box, which I'm showing you right here. I'm going to grab some of I'm just going to stop the screen for a second. I'm going to grab the chats, but keep the chats coming in. I can still see everything that is coming through, and I will ask up some of those. There we go. Always a bit of a strange one. Just give me a couple of minutes. And I will ask away. So, a question from Jeroen, and apologies, Jeroen, if I have pronounced your name wrong. Did you do most of your development in-house or with a lot of external consultants?
So we made a conscious choice to kind of grow our own team and work with a set of partners along the way to give us place, flex, market perspective. So really, we've done majority of it in-house.
Okay.
But there has been an element of partnership along the way.
Sure. And how are you developing the team? Talk me through the way that you're looking at the team diversity and how you build that team internally.
So So in terms of diversity, I think it's really important in our sector where I think there's a perception around the data sector and the diversity of the data sector. And I'm really consciously a believer that actually before the data sector becomes what we all believe it's going to become, I think this is the time to think about diversity and make sure that our teams are diverse. We talk in the organization about representing our community. So I think that's a really good leeway for us to then think about diversity and make sure that our teams are represented. When we co-design, if we can't understand the communities, how are we going to be able to work with them? So, the diversity is very important in our world. In terms of developing the teams, it's a combination of skilling up and learning from others and doing some of the things I mentioned as a leader. The teams do the same thing, hopefully. But I think, to me, it's also really difficult in the 600 plus lines of business context to have that context, have that understanding. So when we grew our own, one thing we learned is actually they had the context, they had the service knowledge. So the need to then have the right kind of aptitude to do skills was much more important than actually just bringing an expert.
Sure, because you want that local knowledge, don't you? You want that understanding. You need a combination. No, I totally agree. Eric has asked a question. What have been the major challenges of being disruptive in the public sector?
I think it's an interesting question. In terms of being disruptive, I do believe we can be a lot more disruptive than we have been. But in terms of what we've achieved, I think, the set of combination of things we have here in terms of our ecosystem has really made it easy to disrupt. Because I think the organization wants
to disrupt. Okay, so it's a willingness of the organization to move forward. Yeah, and I can see that from the amazing offices you're in, but also the thinking behind your servicing the community really, and striving for that ability to make sure that people are on the up and up, and
Exactly.
making, and not only the citizens, but I can see opening up Camden for businesses and for connectivity, and making sure that you can service new startups and that culture.
Yeah.
We've seen that a lot around in the King's Cross area.
And across Camden. So, there's around 25,000 plus businesses in Camden, majority startups.
Yeah.
We have some of the biggest and some of the smallest, etc. I think it's going to continue to evolve, that picture for London.
Okay, so another question. So yeah, you've talked a lot about BI, and you talked a little bit about master data management. How much do you do with governance, predictive analytics, and so on?
Yeah, I think I was actually thinking that's a really good question, and thanks for bringing up governance, because I was thinking we haven't spoken about governance, we've spoken about ethics.
Yes.
I think governance becomes really interesting, particularly I touched briefly on quality issues.
Yes.
So we are doing a lot in that space. So, the shared space, for example, how do you create processing agreements, sharing agreements, even internally between the organization, between departments, let alone between three organizations or across NHS and care. So it is a really, really complex picture. Yeah. I think what we find is actually the gateways exist. If you look closely and hard enough, I think also data for good. I do like that principle. Is the principle. So, if we can share and there's gateways, we will share. If there are no gateways, then there's no other avenues, which will be quite surprising, including how heavily regulated our sectors are. Sure. And that would be quite interesting how we solve that.
Okay. So how are you dealing with the use of personal data, given the new directives around GDPR?
Yeah. So again, a kind of linked to governance issues. So, we believe in good data management. And what that means is, the citizens entrust us with their information. We need to make sure we protect it.
Yeah.
How, in terms of complexities of doing this in the context of new regulations, I'll give you a real example. Someone came downstairs in our reception and spoke to a customer service operative and said, I want you to change my address.
Okay.
And the customer service operative said to them, what do you mean? In what context? Are you interested in council tax?
Yeah.
Obviously the AC singular services.
Sure. And
they said, no, I just want you to update my address. So, the protecting personal data, definitely we must do it. But just putting that process in place. So if I'm a citizen and I call my council, I don't care if they have 50 departments.
No.
I just want them to sort out my stuff.
Exactly.
Because a lot of us are getting used to that principle of talking to chatbots, talking to Amazon, etc. So, we need to evolve and bear in mind the personal sensitivities. So, we have processes in place, we have governance groups in place, we have a data protection officer assigned, we have a borough solicitor who looks after IT, etc.
Sure. Wow, that's a lot more complex than some of the companies that we've worked with over the last year or so, just in governance. Similar dealings with a charity that we just worked with around governance with child data. So I understand, and that's very, very sensitive. So I think we're done with the questions. I think that's that. If there's no more questions, I think I'll just wrap up. It's been my apologies to you about the issues at the beginning. That's the first time it's happened to me. But I've had a wonderful chat with you, and I think you're a very inspirational person and a leader. And you've got quite an extraordinary job ahead of you. Certainly in the way that you'll be using data to make a difference, and data for good. I love that strapline. I wish I'd
get tweeted everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And from my point of view, thank you very much for your time. And thank you all the listeners for your time and for your questions. And I'll continue my next part, the fifth part in the series. Actually, will be quite an interesting one again. I will be having another similar conversation. Won't be in the same room, but with a data strategist, and we'll be talking about data strategies and how we evolve those for companies and for good. So thank you very much, and thank you everybody, and have a good day.
Thank you.